Welcome everybody, welcome back. We've been covering the Age of Absolutism in Europe during this time period of pretty much the 15th, 16th, and 17th century. I'm here to have fun with you guys, learn a little bit, got my Minion shirt on, so you know it's going to be a good day. So we're going to pick up where we left off. We're going to talk about the Age of Absolutism, specifically England, and it's a completely different beast this time. Alright, it's completely different, much like this cat. That hurt. Alright, let's get into it. So, we're basically dealing with two families, two dynastic families, people who are going to be in control during this time period for England. You have the Tudors and the Stuarts. Now, both are popular in their own right, but for the most part, the Tudors are going to be the most popular people, even during their time period. Now, one easy way of remembering that is to think, which one of these has a show on Netflix? Ding, ding, ding. The winner is the Tudors. All right. So these are both popular people in England at this time. They're both leaders, but really the Tudors have the popular support because they know how to get along with Parliament. The Stuarts do not. The Stuarts suck at getting along with Parliament. All right. Just to put it nicely. Whereas the Tudors see that relationship as being extremely valuable. All right. Now, that's going to set up major differences between the two. Now, both of them still believe in the divine right of kings. This idea that God has placed this king or queen in charge of the nation. And thus, the king is above the law. The king sets the law, and he really only receives it from God, which at times can be extremely arbitrary. So that's important differences to note. Now, the first king that we're going to deal with, although not spend too much time with, is James I, King of England. Now, just like all these other kings, he believes in the divine right. And in 1611, he's going to create an entirely new version of the Bible that was unheard of at that time, known as the King James Bible. You may have heard of it before because it's still around today, although the language has been updated and now it's called the New King James Bible. Now, he's a person that's constantly going to offend Parliament. You think Trump's bad? Well, some of these people offending Parliament could have been even worse, okay? And he's going to actively seek to expand trade and influence, much like some of these other people, but he really wanted this power. And he's going to do that through the East India Company, and perhaps you've heard of them in your U.S. history days. Now, some other things that we've already gone into, so we're not going to focus too much with him, is during his reign, he has to deal with the 30 Years' War, which had a lot to do with religion, of course, and we've covered it pretty in depth in some of our previous videos and lectures during class, so we're not going to discuss it too much, but that's important to know with James I. Now, we're really only talking about James I mainly for his son, Charles I, who's going to continue in his father's ways. He is going to continue believing in divine right of kings, like all these rulers really, but he's not going to treat Parliament very well either. And this is going to lead directly to the English Civil War and Charles I ultimately being beheaded. Now, Charles I is going to marry a French Catholic woman who's very devout. Oh, paints me like one of your French girls. Now, I say uh-oh almost any time we bring up religion in a European history course. Because we've already learned about the Protestant Reformation. We've already learned about this shift. We've learned about how King Henry formed his own church just because he wanted to divorce somebody. Right? Oh, the Pope won't let me divorce my wife, so I'm just going to create a new church so I can divorce my wife. So that's really how fickle religion was in Europe at this time. Now, were there genuinely religious people of that time period who were doing things correctly? Yeah, sure. Just like in any time period, but by and large, religion was a huge issue, Catholics versus Protestants. And it continues on. And obviously, England's going to end up being more Protestant. So whenever somebody marries in leadership, like Charles I, somebody of a different religion, and they themselves are a different religion, it's going to add a lot of strife. Now, Charles I realizes, I don't like Parliament very much. So I know what I'll do. I'll get rid of them. He doesn't get his way. He cries like a little baby, and then eventually just says, you know what, be gone. And he sends them away. But this is when trouble's really going to happen for him. You see, he's going to become extremely unpopular. He already was. But he realizes, I need to make some money so that I can go to war and expand my power and influence, not just through the East India Company. Not just through trade, but through war, through conquering lands. Much like we've learned through all these other leaders in Europe at this time, they want to do that. And now he wants to do that. But he runs into a problem. How do I get money for my wars? Well, I guess I'm going to need to tax people. But he's already extremely unpopular, so he's going to risk rebellion. He's going to risk people not looking at him as a leader per se anymore. And so he's realizing that he's going to need a go-to person to help ease the pain of these taxes. So he's going to essentially ask Parliament to come back to be the middleman. And that's exactly what he does. He gets Parliament back to be the middleman between him and the people so that he can tax people, get their money, and go to wars to expand his power and influence. But Parliament is going to be smart. Because they know what's happening here. And they realize, oh, you need something from us now, huh? Well, what's in it for us? And they work out a deal to where Parliament's actually going to restrict the monarch's power a little bit. So we've been talking about absolutism and absolute power, but now that's changing a bit here in this structure. Because remember, in the age of absolutism, absolute monarchies, an absolute despot, by definition, is somebody that's not restricted by law. But here, Parliament's going to try to change that a little bit. And it leads to the Petition of Rights, which Charles I does in fact sign. And it said that the monarch could not give taxes without consent from Parliament. It could not make citizens house soldiers in their own homes. And if you remember back to United States history days, that was an issue even that the colonies faced. A monarch, a king, Charles I, he couldn't just arrest and imprison people without a just cause. He couldn't just say, I don't like your face, you stupid, ugly face person, and then throw him into prison. He couldn't do that. And lastly, he couldn't impose martial law during peacetime. He can't just, in other words, make up arbitrary reasons for why he's doing stuff, when really it's just because of his personal preferences. Now, even though he signs this Petition of Rights, he's not actually going to follow it. He's going to ignore it because it limits his power. Why would he want to continue with this deal when he already got what he got out of it? He got his money for his wars. He doesn't like limited power, so he's going to ignore it. So ultimately, the Petition of Rights does absolutely nothing pragmatically. But the big picture idea is that it's going to set a precedent that the law was higher than any one person, including a monarch. And even though it doesn't fully go into an effect yet, it at least establishes that principle. And it actually goes all the way back to the Magna Carta that was signed hundreds of years ago in England, but people kind of lost touch with that. But it's coming back full circle. Well, so what's Charles I to do? He wants to ignore this. He's already used Parliament. So now he's going to get rid of them again. 2 times in Charles I's reign, he gets rid of Parliament. And then he adds insult to injury. Not only does he get rid of Parliament, but he's going to go and try and arrest Parliament leaders. But it's not going to work out too well at all. So remember, not only did he just use Parliament in order to get the taxes and the money that he needs for wars and then dismiss them, but he also signed a document he had no intention of actually following, the Petition of Rights. And one of those rights that were supposed to be granted was that Charles I couldn't just arrest anybody. So now not only is he ignoring it, but he's going exactly against it and actually going out and arresting parliamentary leaders. But for the most part, he underestimates just how much support they have. And he's the one that ends up fleeing to the north of England because that's where people actually supported and were more loyal to him there. And so now you actually have this division, this civil war that's coming up. And for about 7 years, from 1642 to 1649, you're going to have this English Civil War. And here's some key terms that's very important for you to know. The Cavaliers, also known as Royalists, were supporters of the king. These are people that were up in northern England supporting the king, rallying behind Charles I. But in the other corner, you have the Roundheads. Now, if that's not a great team name, I don't know what is. So when you start baseball or basketball, volleyball, any of your sports, try to change your school name from the Raiders or the Aftershocks or anything that you can come up with and change it to the Roundheads and see what kind of reaction you get. But the Roundheads were the Puritan supporters of Parliament. Say that 10 times fast. Puritan supporters of Parliament. Puritan supporters of Parliament. Puritan supporters of Parliament. You get the point. Now, Oliver Cromwell, I'm sure you've heard the name before, is the military mastermind behind the Roundheads. He's the roundiest Roundhead of them all. And he's in charge of the New Model Army, which was Parliament's army, made up of Puritans who called themselves independents, and they legitimately thought that they were doing battle for the Lord, that they were going to war and fighting against this tyrant for the Lord. Fighting against the Catholics. They were so extreme in this belief that ultimately you could think of it as, well, they're Protestants, they're Puritans, and they're fighting for the Lord to essentially send the paganistic Catholics to hell faster. It's extreme, I know, but try thinking of it from their perspective for a little bit, and then also from the other perspective. Again, like I said, religion is a huge issue in European history, and in all history, but specifically during this time period, because you're not too far removed from the Protestant Reformation. So you have this civil war going into full effect for roughly 7 years of Cromwell against Charles I and his Cavaliers. So it's the Roundheads with Cromwell in one corner and the Cavaliers and Charles I in the other corner. Who's going to win? Well, you probably already know, just by my tone, but Cromwell is going to win. The Roundheads, believe it or not, are going to win against a team like the Cavaliers, who had LeBron James. Oh, not those Cavaliers? Darn, always getting that confused. Anyway, Charles I is going to be put on trial for treason, and then he's going to lose and be executed. This is huge. Never before in history had a king been put on a public trial and executed in front of his people, in front of the public. Everything that we've learned so far in the Age of Absolutism says that that could never happen, but here it does. So Oliver Cromwell is going to take over. He's now going to be the head kahuna. He's going to do a handful of things that generally we could agree with and be like, okay, that sounds good. At least us in America, knowing how tyrannical some of these absolute rulers could be and why the colonies really rejected it and wanted to claim independence in the first place. And we could get on board. You see, some of the first things he does is abolish the House of Lords, which was the nobility in England, and abolish the monarchy. No more king, no more queen. And he's going to declare England to be a republic, otherwise known as a commonwealth. And that's the type of system of government that he employs with England during this time. But he too is going to end up hating Parliament. He thinks it's really hard to work with them, so he's going to dismiss them and send them away, and he's ultimately going to set up a military dictatorship. So great, we went from a king who told us what to do to now not a king who told us what to do and has weapons to fight us if we don't listen. But ultimately, he is considered to be Lord Protectorate, Oliver Cromwell. And he's going to rule, actually, until he dies. But once he dies, the Royalists, the Cavaliers, they actually go to his grave, dig up his dead body, hang it up, and chop off his head. Sick. Well, I guess Cromwell didn't mind. I mean, he was already dead. But either way, It's just symbolic of how much they hated Cromwell and how much these differences were really tearing people apart. So Parliament is going to return now that the Stuarts are going to be restored as well. And even though the Stuarts and Parliament didn't always get along, this was kind of like the enemy of my enemy is my friend. They all hated Cromwell and the Roundheads. That was their common enemy. That common enemy is gone, so maybe they can start to work together a little bit. And so Parliament's going to return and actually reinstate the monarchy, so it didn't actually last without a king or a queen for too long. And Charles II's going to take the throne for roughly 25 years. So the Stuart monarchy is back. And Parliament's going to gain a little bit of the power that they had gained in the last few years. They're going to reinstate the Church of England as the official state religion. Uh-oh. Again, anything with religion is uh-oh during this time period. Now, the Church of England, remember, was essentially a Catholic church. In deeds and in action, but not in name. And you have England, which has a lot of Protestants now. So obviously, the rights of Protestants are going to be diminishing during this time period, which is why in American history, you learn that this is the time when a lot of Protestants were coming over to North American colonies because of religious persecution, right? This is what we're seeing on the other side of the pond, so to speak. And so you already know that uh-ohs are about to happen. And so James II, after Charles II dies, is going to take the throne, and he's openly Catholic, and he's going to hire other Catholics to be in high up government positions. Uh-oh! It's like squirrel. Squirrel! But that's an issue. You have a Catholic ruler in a place that has a lot of Protestants, and he's hiring Catholics in the government and not Protestants. So that's a huge issue. But for the most part, the population of England were going to be long-suffering and patient with him. They were going to wait it out until he croaked and died, and they got somebody else on the throne. Because his oldest daughter was actually a self-professed Protestant. So they figured he doesn't have a son. When she comes up to take the throne, she'll be Protestant. All will be well. But like the great song says, a baby changes everything. And it certainly does, but not for the better, at least not for the Protestants. James II's gonna have a son. And he's gonna baptize him as a Catholic. And so Parliament hates this. Oh no, now he has a son, so now when he dies, it's still gonna be Catholic, because that stupid little baby's Catholic. So what Parliament's gonna do is invite his oldest daughter, Mary, alongside her husband, William of Orange, to take the throne. So there's a clash, because James II's still on the throne. And now they want Mary and William of Orange to be on the throne. And so it's gonna fight! And it's gonna be a big issue. And they are gonna fight. Kind of. And this leads to the Glorious Revolution. Now, why is it glorious? Well, how can a revolution be glorious? People die. Well, this revolution is glorious because people do not die. James II sees what's happening, and he just willingly leaves and gives up the throne. And so William and Mary, maybe you've heard of the college, take the throne. And now England is Protestant and all is happy. But the last thing I need to say about this is that William and Mary are going to sign the English Bill of Rights, which restricts their power. And you can see on the screen here all the different things that the Bill of Rights, the English Bill of Rights, made them sign over. Things like the king or queen could not suspend the operation of laws. The king couldn't interfere with justice. They couldn't get taxes or a standing army during peacetime without Parliament's consent. All of these different ideas, these English Bill of Rights, were protecting common people and restricting the monarch's power. So you're really seeing this shift from this age of absolutism, at least in England, to now more of a constitutional monarchy where these monarchs are restricted by law. So I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed something. And hopefully, if there's a test or a quiz, you'll be all right. Until next time, see ya.